Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna mute myself.
Okay. I'm gonna give you a little introduction, Hector, and then we can get going. Does that sound good? Okay. So I'm Nicole. I'm the lead student coordinator at First Generation Initiatives. Thanks everyone for coming. If just as a reminder, if you could mute yourself other than when you're asking a question, that would be great because it just helps limit any background noise. And I know people are working from home and everything, so dogs and kids and all of that. I don't want to hear any of it. I'm kidding. And then also, if you could go over to the chat room, you can get to the chat box by pressing the button below. And then I put a link in there and I can paste it in again right now. And if you wouldn't mind signing in using that link, then if you come to 2 of these grad school day workshops, then you have a chance to win a $50 Amazon gift card. So you should probably take advantage of that. But then without further ado, I think I will just introduce our guest speaker. Go ahead, take it away.
Cool. Well, thank you. And thank you, Sam, for having me. I appreciate you a lot. Sam's a really good friend of mine. We've gone through a lot together, and it's really cool because she's seen me go through some of these things that I'm gonna talk about. And so I'm gonna tell you like what I think would be helpful to you all in the time frame of like my last 5 years, basically, since I graduated college. And so I'm gonna walk through kind of some of the decisions I made, why I made those decisions, and then I'm even gonna dive in a little bit deeper and like be a little bit vulnerable with you all about why some of the decisions I made were necessary for me at that time. And so, uh, if at any point, like I said, you have questions or personal questions, don't be afraid to ask. Like I'm going to push that so hard because I put myself in your position and I hate being in the seat and I hate wanting to ask a question but not being able to because I don't have the courage to, or if I'm just like second guessing myself or I don't want to sound stupid or whatever it is. So I'm really pushing you all to do so. Be as honest and as vulnerable as you want to be. So I'm going to begin with kind of when I graduated in 2015 from CSU, which they call the Harvard of Fort Collins. Um, I actually didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I graduated with a degree in human development and family studies. But I had chosen that major my last year of college. So before that, I was a health and exercise science major. And then I wanted to get into education. So I thought, okay, like how could I do this without having to like cost myself another year of school? And so I went the human development and family studies route. Um, and I found myself not enjoying the classes very much, but I knew that it gave me access to the things I wanted in that time, which was an opportunity to get into education. So I made that decision and graduated with that degree. All right. So here's where the story gets kind of grad school related. Is I did fine in college. I did well. Um, I got into this program that was held by the Betcher family, and it was called like the Betcher Scholars Foundation. Um, so I got this scholarship basically to do grad school and get a master's in education. And the requirement was that I would take like, I would start in the summer. So after I graduated in May, I would start in July, and then I would continue into August. And in August, I would also teach a seventh grade classroom. And so that's where I started my grad school journey. And when I decided to do that, I already went into those classes and I wasn't sure about it already because I felt like I made the decision based off of the scholarship and the opportunity rather than what I really, really wanted to do. Because I actually hadn't been in a classroom yet or knew exactly what I wanted to do in education. I just knew I wanted to be a part of it. All right. So I'm taking these classes and I get into the seventh grade class. And within the first week, I'm loving the students. But by the second week, I'm not loving how the school functioned and how it fit what I wanted and the needs I had. And so then I'm second guessing about what I'm doing and if this program is really worth it. Because even though the school is being paid for, Micah mentioned cost of living. I didn't have any means because I was teaching Monday through Friday, but I didn't, and I was taking classes on the weekends or in the evenings. And other than that, I didn't have time to work. And so I didn't have any means to kind of continue this program. Um, and so all those personal factors were just like pushing me away from it. And so that was my first experience of grad school, and I was already just turned off by it. So by uh, November of that semester, I made the decision to leave that grad school program because I knew that it wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to like say kind of F it and start working full time. And so I did exactly that. All right, so here's where I'm going to get a little bit crazy with you all. So between that time in November and like December, I started looking for jobs. So I didn't have a job. I wasn't in school. I was living with my parents and classic boomerang situation. And um, when I was living with them, I started applying to other grad schools. So I thought, okay, maybe education, teaching isn't the way I want to do things. Maybe it's higher education. So then I applied to like a school in San Diego, got accepted, and I thought, okay, maybe this is the path I want to take. And so as I considered that, like put that at the top of the list, just to try that out again, before I had actually tried the profession, I was going into this educational route. And so then in that time between November and December, my mom passed away. And so when she passed away, my little sister was 14 years old at the time. And I couldn't just make the decision to leave anymore. And so that option of leaving school to go to San Diego wasn't an opportunity anymore. It was something I had to make a decision to stay here and keep working or start working. And so remember, I didn't have a job. I wasn't in school at the time. And so I just graduated. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And so I'm starting to take care of my little sister and we're trying to make things work. And so I finally get a job, my first job out of college, really. And that was like 6 months, 7 months, 8 months after I had graduated. So I'm just now starting to work and uh, still wanted to like to scratch that itch of like wanting to be in education. So I left that, went into a nonprofit where I was able to work in education and in schools. And in that, decided something that I didn't want to do. And it was because I learned it, right? And so that's like, I guess the first take, number one, is I think it's really important to experience the profession in some way or in some capacity before making the decision to go into grad school for it. That's like the first thing because I was making decisions based off of things that like I thought it could get me before I actually knew what it could get me, right? So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I stumbled upon an opportunity to work for where I work now, which is called Guild Education. And so it is education focused. I don't know if any of you have heard of it before or not. Have you? So somewhat, yeah. So maybe not. Um, I'm gonna give you the brief like summary of what it is. And so basically, what we do is we partner with clients like Walmart or Disney, Chipotle, and we work with them to manage the account to have the employer pay full benefits for their employees to get college paid for. Like that's what we do. And so I work on the managing the account side and I work with students specifically. So that's what I do. And as I got into that, I started to explore like different options and seeing different jobs that I didn't even know existed. And so then I'm now, just to kind of tie it all together, uh, finally decided to do an MBA. And so I'm in an MBA program now. I graduate in August. I have one class left. I'm taking two right now, and I'm like halfway done with those. And I don't know if you've ever had the experience where you take a class and it hits you where like, holy shit, I should have been doing this from the beginning. And this is the moment I had with these courses and the experience I'm having at work where it all ties in together and it makes me feel like, okay, this is what I should have done. And there's no regrets, right? Because I had to go through all these things and all these steps to before I got to the point where I'm at. But I'm happy with the decision I made. And then there's a whole lot of like little factors that go into it and why I made the decision and the financial pieces and all that stuff. And so that's kind of like the basic, like surface level intro of my grad school journey. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Anyone have any questions? It sounds to me like there were some obstacles that, and I appreciate the overview. But I think it sounds like one of the most challenging aspects of that whole process was probably deciding what you wanted to do as you were taking care of your little sister. Can you talk more about that
Yeah.
kind of obstacle that you faced?
Yes. I love that because taking care of my little sister and not having a job. All right. You ever hear that quote where they say, you don't really like money's nothing or money's everything when you don't have it? Like that kind of, I wasn't necessarily in a bad place, but I could feel myself going in a bad place if I did nothing about it. And so money became important to me. And we did fine and all that stuff. But I realized in that time that the financial, I guess, goals I have didn't necessarily align with the dreams I was having in that moment. Um, and the doors that I was following weren't going to give me access to the stability and the fortune that I wanted, because when my mom passed away, we didn't have a life insurance policy, or we didn't own a house, you know what I mean? That we could inherit. We didn't have cars that we could inherit. There was nothing like that. And so what it left us with was like actually bills and obviously like the services and things like that. And I had one of the best communities and support systems at that time too, where a lot of that stuff was like we had to start a GoFundMe page. I mean, that takes a lot of like pride to do something like that, because I mean, you're asking people to help you, and that's one of the hardest things you could do. um, and that's where I guess like I started to realize that's like that money piece mattered to me. And so I guess when you ask like at that time when I was taking care of my little sister, what kind of like was I thinking in terms of making that decision, I think money became a top factor, because and it wasn't before, and it wasn't something I cared about or even thought about. I thought I'll always be fine. Even when I started working for that nonprofit, I thought, okay, well, if I do this for 10 years, like there's like loan forgiveness, and I started thinking about all these other things that are true, but not necessarily true to my values. And so that's, I mean, yeah, like you've got to experience that sort of like hardship in some way to know, I guess, what is truly important to you. And that's where I learned that. That's where I learned that money, and not greedy money, but like I want to make sure that like if I were to go, that I had a financial, or like that I had some sort of stability to leave my children, or my spouse or my little sister or whatever it may be. And so uh that's where I think the decision to pursue an MBA came a little bit too.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a restart, of like a reset, where you were like, like now that I'm faced with this, what do I really want out of it, or what do I really want to pursue?
Yep. Yeah. And that was one thing I learned too, was that I think before I had felt that, I felt like it was always either pursue like something you wanted to do, but you can't really have like the money to do that. And then after a while, I started to learn that you can actually do something you really want to do and make good money doing it.
Mhm. So Tisha asks, what are some conversations you have? Wait, what kind of conversations you have with your students now, that you wish someone had told you while starting grad school? Oh my
Yeah. Uh, so with the students that I work with, uh, a lot of them are going back to school, and so um, the conversations are a little bit different. And because they're not, students who are enrolled or went right out of college or something like that, a lot of them actually have to do with the finance piece, the fears around that, or like the failing piece, or actually the most common conversation point is like working full time and managing school, which is something that I do right now. And I think when it comes to like having those conversations, um, I don't know, you'll probably hear this all the time, and I'm just going to reinforce it because it's the truth. But when you're doing both, whether it's like full time and going to school, and you're doing both at the same time, like you kind of got to suck it up and sacrifice like that socialization piece, or like, I don't know, some of the wants, right? And take care of the needs. And I think that that's like the most important thing. Where at the time, right out of college, I didn't really expect myself to want to give up, Saturdays to do studying or to read or to write a paper or something like that. And I do that now effortlessly, um, because I know it's important, right? But that's not necessarily something you have to like, that you're born with. It's not something that you have. It's like something you have to like embrace, and just know that that's like there's no gray area in that. It's something you have to do. And that's kind of the conversations that I have with my students, is like being straightforward and saying that that gray area doesn't exist in getting things done. And so uh yeah, when you work full time and you're a student, and oftentimes my students are parents, or taking care of other people, or sometimes actually do work more than one job. And so even for me, right, it's a privilege to just work one full-time job that pays for my school, and I just get to focus on those two things. Whereas there's a lot of different factors that go into it. And my situation has changed where I'm not taking care of my little sister now or anything like that, right? So I'm in a lot different of a place than some of the students I work with. And so that's like, I think I think motivation and time are like the two things that come up often with these students.
And do you have any tips for how to balance your time? It sounds like you just have to kind of negotiate your priorities and maybe take that Saturday to study. But do you have any other advice or any other tips?
Yeah, I guess I think to elaborate on that, it's like I think it's not a negotiation, and I think that's the mentality you have to adopt. Is that if it's a negotiation, then you're allowing yourself to be okay with the other side of it, which is maybe not doing this for exchange of that. And it's like it's not a negotiation. It's a needs to happen. And um, if you can prioritize, I guess, choices that way or your time that way for things like that are important like that, then I think that that's like I'll never say the key to success or anything like that, but that's definitely going to be the key to be doing well in your courses and in your work, right? Like uh it's like for me, I've given up a lot of things, and it's been gym time, right? Things I love like that. It's been hanging out with my family. It's been seeing my friends like Samantha and Jesus, and missing out on events like that were that are important to me, but also like it's that temporary sacrifice for that like long term gain.
So can you talk a little bit more about the first grad school program that you got into? I think that it sounds challenging to then switch. Did you feel kind of defeated when you had to make that switch or when you had to drop out of that program?
Yeah, it's a good question. I felt embarrassed actually. Uh, that was like probably the biggest thing is because like I think the way I try to carry myself is I want to be the most confident person, right? I want to be the most like I don't know, just like put together and all that stuff. And there was a time where when you give something up like that, you feel like you failed. Like you definitely feel like I let myself down. I let the people who are looking up to me down. Like I let the people around me down. The people who invested in me, I let them down. And there's just like this heavy guilt that sits with you when you experience that. And I mean, a lot of you may have had that before, whether it's having to quit a job or having to quit school for whatever reason the first time, or having to choose one school for the other, right? Whatever decision you've had to make in life, like there's always this guilt that comes with it. And for me, that guilt sat heavy. Uh, I didn't, I was a little embarrassed. Like I didn't know what to say. And so I felt like I had to be optimistic, because if I wasn't being optimistic, then I would let that guilt kind of weigh me down. Because I like, I don't know, like I actually I joke around about this stuff all the time. And I always tell my coworkers I'm not big on like the strengths finder stuff or anything like that. But then I always end up finding the theme in them anyway. And so I contradict myself on that, because one of the biggest ones that I find, and I'm telling you about as if I love this stuff, but one of the biggest strengths I found is that I think very futuristically. And I think that that's a really good thing in a lot of ways, right? Where I can think big picture. And so I think that the way to not get stuck in that guilt is to think big picture and just think like, okay, this is a tiny piece, right, of whatever comes next. And to be big picture, you have to be futuristic and think, okay, what is next? Because if I continue to like worry or stress out about what I just did or the decision I made, like and think about what others are thinking, then that decision will never be right, because I didn't allow it to be right. Um, so it was something I had to come to terms with. It was something that I had to really, I did feel like I had to work really hard to do, because I was embarrassed. And so it was like the more I talked about it, and the more less I felt guilty, because then, people would be like, oh, cool. Like brush it off as if it was nothing. And whereas to me, I was like, dude, but I just gave this up. Like, and to other people, people don't, it's not as big of a deal to others as it is sometimes to us.
Do you think that you had a good support system in that time for so that others can continue to support you through your journey, or were you kind of doing it solo and making the decisions for yourself and going with?
Uh, I was solo for sure, but that was my own fault. That wasn't because I didn't have people around me. That was because I was too prideful to ask for help or for advice or anything like that. Like that's straight up that's just a me thing. And actually, it's not just a me thing. It's probably a lot of us thing. But for whatever reason, I didn't want to ask for help. I didn't want to say like, this is where I'm going through. This is what I'm afraid of. Like, I'm afraid to quit this program. I'm afraid to like not be able to afford whatever comes next. Like, I didn't want to say those things because again, that guilt, right, or that shame comes in, and so I think I, there's always a support system. I think whether it's like your family or people you're close to, like your friends, or sometimes it's none of those at all, and sometimes it's the professionals around you, right? Just like you all. Like this is a good example of somebody who might care, or somebody in this room might be sitting down right on the couch at home or whatever, or on their bed, but they're probably don't even realize that like okay, like the support system doesn't always have to be what it is stereotypically, right? Of like a partner or a daughter, a son, a father. It's sometimes just the people around you, like a staff or a faculty.
So Sam asks, have there been other times that you felt guilty about the sacrifices and decisions that you have made? And then for a lot of first-gen students, sacrificing family is difficult. Have you felt that you had to do that, and how have you handled it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think my dynamics have shifted a little bit. I think because, as I mentioned, like the loss of my mom changed a little bit kind of the way that works for me. But I feel like even now, I feel like I need to stay close to home in some way, right? And so that almost eliminates options. So when I was picking grad schools or programs or opportunities, it's like I needed to do something that was close to my sister, right? Because I wanted to take responsibility for that. And now she's off in college doing her own thing. And, as much as I'd like to believe she probably doesn't need me, I know she does. And I think that the truth is too is like I probably need her too, right? Is like I need that support system too. And so when I make that decision of what I'm doing, I think that that's the part, that's that first gen part, especially as a Hispanic dude. Like I am the only boy in my family. I have three other sisters, right? Dad's not around. Mom obviously passed away. I have a little sister and I have one nephew who's like 10 years old, you know, but that's it. That's it. And my sisters are single mothers. Uh, one of my sisters just got married recently, and so that's like the first time we have another male in the house. And so, and not the house, I guess in our family. Um, so for that entire period of making a decision on grad school, I've also taken on that role of like, I guess, and I'm not the biggest fan of this, but it's just the way it is my family would see me as like the man of the house. And even though it's like we all know that that's not exactly how we want to be, especially because we're both right. We're like Mexican and American, and so we carry both values of what it means to be a man of the house, but also like uh, it just kind of falls in like that. And so I think again back to that guilt piece, like I feel like I'm a heavy, I'm a big pillar, a large, a wide pillar in holding up the stability of my family. And so if I remove this large pillar, right, I think my family sometimes may feel like they're smaller pillars, straw pillars, and the house could fold if that big pillar is removed. And that's not true. Um, but I think that that's the dynamic that I guess I can try to make visual for you all of what like it's like to come from like a first gen family or providing from your family in some ways. That's definitely kind of what it feels like.
So whenever you mentioned that you feel like a provider, do you ever feel guilty for pursuing your own education and to sacrifice the time spent with your family? Maybe you're pursuing this grad school program and it's for your family, but do you ever feel like that you're kind of like battling those two opposite sides?
Yeah, I do. um, I'm starting to laugh because I see that we have somebody who came in who Sam and I would call an intruder, but but he's actually one of our really good friends. So it's really cool to see him too. But to answer your question, uh, I think I think in undergrad and then that first trial of grad school, the answer would be yes. Like, I don't know if any of you all have felt this too, but like when you leave off for school or like when you're doing school, I don't know, maybe you get phone calls from your parents or something like that. And I know for me, it was always like I was never the one calling. Like I was never the one calling my parents; they would call me. And there was times where I would actually make the choice not to answer the phone call, and that does not sit well with like my my family or anything like that, or my mom or my sister. um I think that, yeah, just making that choice makes me feel, I guess, at the time guilty, but I also, it wasn't always based on like education or pursuing that education. It was like a values thing or not understanding like what was important to them or how that might like be on them, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think now making the decision in terms of grad school, I think that's a lot different. I think grad school, I think, as I mentioned, is like I'm pursuing different things, and I think that one of the things is like being like helping provide for my family in some ways. And so if that means like uh seeking that financial gain where I can actually like uh I guess provide for my family, and I think it's a different goal. So I don't feel guilty because I know that it's in their benefit as well.
Mhm. That makes sense. Can you talk more about any of the scholarships that you might have applied to and what the application process was for all of these schools and kind of the logistical planning of going to grad school?
Yeah. I'd say for the first time it was uh I think the biggest thing you think about is like your grade point average. I think that's like the thing that comes up. There's a lot of things that actually, a lot of steps I took to try different things at different schools and apply to different places. So like I think GPA was one of the things that actually matters a little bit because I think it's there's a cutoff. Um, and when there's a cutoff, like for different schools, then it just changes like kind of the dynamic, right? Or like the opportunity. Because if I don't have the 2.75 or the 3.0 that is the minimum cutoff for this grad program, then I probably can't apply. So I think grade point average is like the first thing I would consider. Um, Mike has got 3.77, man. You're pretty much, you should apply to Harvard for sure. Um, but yeah, like that's like the first thing. So I think if there's any kind of advice, like you should try to keep your GPA up as high as possible. Like aim for as close to that 4.0 because it's not necessarily about um, proving that you did well in, like in school to anybody else other than just kind of like this admissions committee that will kind of dictate, you know, what entry you get on that GPA. And so although it's almost might be just a number, like it kind of plays a significant role. And so GPA is the first thing I think in terms of applications. And there's some schools that require like the Gmat or GRE or something like that. And so I actually took the Gmat before going to Bellevue University, which is the school that my job offers to pay for. So I took it um, with the intentions to apply to schools like DU or CU or something like that because they were local, right? And so the school I go to is actually an online school, which is not something I thought I was going to do. Um, but like we mentioned, right, we're like, if the opportunity is there, then I'm going to take that. And so that was another step I had to take though before I was like, before I knew this was an opportunity, is I had to pay right to take a GMAT. And even before doing that, I paid for like a 6 week like course on how to take the GMAT at DU. So like I paid for that. That was like $1,000, right? So you got to start thinking about all these things and different investments in order to like start preparing for grad school in some cases, right?
Can you talk about the GRE or GMAT? Can you explain what that is and how that might help somebody pursuing grad school?
Yeah. So the GMAT and GRE are actually sometimes requirements um, by the school that in order for you to be admitted. And it's basically a standardized test. And both are pretty similar. I studied both, but like I took only the GMAT. And the GMAT is just a little more, I guess, if you were to look it up, it would just say it's more like um, numbers focused is kind of like the way to think about it. And that was good for like business, right? So like applying to MBAs and stuff like that, that's what it was good for. And so yeah, that's kind of what that means. I think not all schools require it, right? Most like I guess schools that have a higher rigor, kind of like the DU business school, right? Or um, if you were trying to get into like Harvard, like I'm joking around with all day, that would require the GMAT usually. GRE is more of like the general exam, which is like uh, when I was considering doing education, right? Like there was some schools that would require me to take the GRE. Like they wouldn't require me to take the GMAT, but the GRE.
So you talked about how you're doing online classes. Do you have any recommendations on how to manage school online?
How to manage it online, you said?
Yeah, taking classes online.
Yeah. Have like I don't really I just want to kind of gauge. Have you all experienced taking online classes before this? Anybody else really? Some have. So it's like so I'm taking two classes right now. I saw that pop up. So I'm taking two classes right now. And the way I manage it is again, I give up a lot of time. But when I'm at work, work is work, right? So 9 to 5, I'm just focused on that. Your assignments and basically everything is due on certain days, right? So one of my classes will require me to finish up a course or sorry, all my assignments by Friday. So Friday I have to have everything in. And then they'll have a second due date like on Sunday. And so I got to have the second half of everything due on Sunday. And so that requires me to like, okay, I got to do the first half of everything between Monday and Friday in my evenings. But then everything that's due on Sunday, I might be able to do on Saturday and on Sunday if I need. Everything's usually due at like midnight, right? And so everything you're just submitting. So that's what like it's pretty just like it's pretty standard like that. But the way it looks and the way you receive the information is a lot different. Whereas like if you're taking classes, it's not like you're hopping in and you're watching lectures. Actually, I rarely watch lectures. Um, the professors will lay out an entire like agenda for that week of things you have to read, PowerPoints you have to go through, sometimes lectures you have to see, but not often. Um, and they'll have the assignments. And from my experience, at least, like a lot of the assignments that I do are discussion based, which I'm sure a lot of you kind of are aware of, where you post a discussion, sometimes like a 500 word discussion about something, right? So mine have a lot to do with like management or finance or accounting right now. And so uh, I'll like write up something like that with my perspective on how to manage a certain account or something like that. And then other people will chime in the next 2 days with what their thoughts are or why I'm wrong or why how it could be better. And that is one thing I've noticed too about grad school versus like undergrad is people actually take those things serious. Um, so like when you write something, you kind of got to actually write something with like meaning. And I remember in college, like I would BS everything, and I can't do that as easily anymore. And it has its pros and cons, but like, so I'm like forced to learn it because now I'm being held accountable by this, like, not necessarily checking in with the professor, but like by my peers. And so that's kind of like the nice thing about doing online stuff is like you're kind of just being checked by your peers, and it's not just you and the professor.
So I think we'd like to talk about imposter syndrome, that a lot of first generation students struggle with imposter syndrome. Have you ever experienced that in your program now?
Yeah,
Are you?
uh, I do not as often. I think in education, I didn't for whatever reason. I think it's because like it's something that I felt like, all right, I've already earned this. Like I felt like I earned a place. But then doing business specifically, I think is a little bit different. Um, and I think I feel it even at work sometimes, right? But I do feel it as a first gen student because it comes out in those discussion posts, you know, and sometimes we'll be having a discussion back and forth where um, I don't know, sometimes I'll read other people's posts and I'll see how like talented they are either at writing or just like explaining themselves, and how they pulled information that I didn't even understand or see in the text or something like that. And I'm like, where the hell did you get this? And so I'm seeing people pull out these things and then they sound so great. And then I'll work with that same person on a group. And so then we'll do a video chat, and I hear the way they talk and I hear the things that they do and their profession while they're doing their MBA. And then some people are already senior or VP level. And that's where it sits with me, where I'm like, dude, like, I don't know. Sometimes I feel, to give you all context too, I'm 28. And sometimes in this program, I feel like I'm young to be doing it because people are well off into their careers. And so I think grad school has that difference as well, where there's a, depending on what kind of program or at what age or what program you enter in, there's going to be like people who are purely focused on just that, right? So a lot of people from DU will go straight into the DU master's program for their MBA. Law school students, a lot of students from DU will go straight from like whatever they majored in undergrad to law school, right? But then there's like the part-time schools, like part-time law school. My cousin is in it, and he was talking to me about that a little bit too, where he took like the initial like law program where it was just standard and normal, and he just was not, it wasn't sitting well with him. People were just too fast paced. It was the only thing they were focused on. They weren't working. It was like just school. But then he did the part-time program, and it was like working adults, and it was people who like uh had families and other priorities, and there was just this difference in understanding. And so I think that imposter syndrome sits in, and depending on like the program you choose, it's gonna like be amplified, or hopefully, you blend well or feel like you blend well.
Can I ask something real quick about that?
Yeah.
So I visited my perspective campus, and I didn't realize what like imposter syndrome was until I was on campus. I felt very like vulnerable and insecure once I saw everybody around me. I just didn't feel like I was like them. Like I looked at my jeans, I had a hole in them. They were all wearing suits, and I'm like, oh crap, what am I getting myself into? And they all had like funding, and I had like just the GI Bill. So I'm still dealing with a lot of self doubt. How did you overcome that and just get past it and fit in?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I think it's so funny because when I was telling you about my cousin who told me about him doing the law school at DU right now, he told me the like such a similar story, which I think is hilarious. He like talked about how he just showed up in like basketball shorts to one of his classes, and everyone's in suits and stuff like that, and how everyone's like funded by generational money, things like that. Anyway, so I thought it was really funny that you asked that or pointed that out. For me, I think it's going to be different for everybody, but I think this is where I guess a new chapter in my life where I am not afraid to express those things. And so I began to rely on people around me. And so even though like it's hard, right? Like again, your support system isn't always going to just be your family and things like that, because I know that my family idolizes me. They think I'm already a CEO and they think I'm already the best of the best. And that's like actually one thing that comes with being first gen is they think like your first job out of college is like hot shit. And that's another thing that comes with that like pressure. So family's always going to support me, but they don't quite understand what it really means. But I found a support system like somewhere, right? So you got to find that somewhere, Micah. Like whether it's people in this room, right, or if it's people at home, wherever it is, you got to find what works for you. What worked for me was actually the people who I least expected it to be. It was the people at work, because I'm working around a lot of really talented people. I'm working with a lot of really smart people, and I guess when I express to them, oh, like I'm doing this and I'm going to work and I'm doing school at the same time, like you yourself forget how like badass that is until like someone who like you look up to or respect highly is telling you that is badass, right? Like, and so you got to surround yourself around those people, Micah. And like, I think it's for me, it's been my coworkers, and even though I don't even like, I'm not as close to them as I am to like Sam or other friends that I have. Um, but it's like the what they see in me that sort of motivated me. And I think I'm not afraid to admit that like sometimes like uh that affects me, I guess, what people think of me. Not as much as it used to, right? But it does. It gives me either like a positive reaction or negative reaction when I see people at work who I admire and look up to and who are at a high level of where I want to be, tell me that what I'm doing is going to get me there, right? That's motivation. That tells me, all right, I'm doing the right thing. I'm in the right place. And so even though I'm in these classes with other people from different backgrounds, like it stops mattering, I guess, because I already know I'm qualified because I'm doing good things. I got the bright people I have in my corner. And I think that's like kind of the key, right? But you have to find that in places you don't expect. I didn't expect to have to rely on coworkers I don't, necessarily know the dynamics of their family of, but I found it in them.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think a lot of people face those sort of similar pressures from their families. So I think that's really kind of supportive of you because everyone's saying thank you. I have a question for you about what is your favorite part of grad school currently?
Um, that I'm almost done, I think. But no, I think for me, it's that, I think it is that I found something I like I enjoy learning. And I think I enjoyed that first program I was in college, right? But then I didn't enjoy that second one, as I mentioned. I didn't enjoy that education piece or that education journey I went on very much, and it just wasn't for me. And so then I found this, and it was something that I really enjoy, right? Like I don't have to put effort into wanting to do this. I don't question everything I'm learning, and I think when you're not enjoying somebody, that's when you become defensive in some way. And I'm not defensive. I'm open, right? Like I'm learning these things, and I'm excited about it. I'm excited to be able to bring that up in conversations or to listen to, I don't know, even simple things that of places I can apply it to where I didn't expect before, whether that's meetings at work or conversations with friends.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you're like a futuristic thinker and that you're always looking ahead. Um, do you have any recommendations for how to better set goals or where you're hoping to go?
Yeah. I think hopefully, right? Like, okay, so let me back up by saying too, like, uh, the work that I do, I really love the company that I'm at, and I think that that's a really, really big thing when you decide to go to grad school, right? Is if you want to work full time and go to school, or do school full time. I think that I wouldn't have it any other way. Like, I love that I work full time at a place that I really enjoy being at, and I love that I get to do school at the same time for it because as I'm like simultaneously building relationships and networking at work and being promoted for different things or being involved in different task force or like uh, I don't know, anything that's involving sort of getting ahead at work, whether it's interviewing people or checking resumes, all those things that I get to do like are helping me get ahead while I'm also being able to apply the stuff that I'm learning in school. And yes, I think like working full time has kind of been the biggest blessing, I guess, at a place that you like. And so if there was like some sort of big picture, like I guess suggestion that I could make is like try to find a place that you can simultaneously apply the work that you're doing. And so people talk about internships all the time, and I think internships are amazing, right? But also sometimes are meant for people who can afford that, right? Who can afford to maybe take 20 hours a week, not paid, right, to do that. Um, but there's also a lot of jobs that if you were to ask for a part-time job, maybe not like a like like I mean, if you were to come to the company I work for and say, hey, like I want to be here, I want to work here, I want to learn here. Um, can I do this for 20 hours a week or something like that? Or like, apply for a job and let them know your situation and let them know like I'm in grad school and this is how I want to apply it or something. Like there's places out there that would allow you to do that. But yeah, the biggest benefit has just being able to like apply what I'm doing while I'm doing it, if that makes sense.
Mhm. In our other sessions, we talked a lot about learning how to advocate for yourself. Was there ever a moment that you maybe were faced with a challenge and then you had to learn to like ask for help? I think you talked about how you struggled with asking for help or maybe advocate for yourself. And so, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I still struggle with asking for help. I am a lot less like resistant to it now, but definitely is something that like I experienced, especially with grad school. like asking for a letter of recommendation is asking for help. And that's something that I was sometimes too prideful to ask for somebody who probably respected me and cared for me, but I didn't want to ask. And then when I did ask him, I didn't want to ask him more than once. And that's one. So like asking for help already is like hurting me, right? Or not wanting to ask for help is hurting me because I'm not able to like use the resources of the network I've already built because of this pride, right? This mental block that only I put in front of me. Um, then there's advocating in terms of like funding, and I think that's a big one because uh, I think of like I guess like at my job uh, when I first well here let me back up a little bit. Um, Tuition reimbursement is like a thing that exists, but is capped off at like $5,000, right? It's like $5,250. So it's capped off there, right? Um, some companies will only offer you like less than that a year. And when they offer less than that, right, that's sometimes right due to their own budget or whatever constraints they might have. But a lot of times, right, like that's a point of advocating for yourself. And so I would say even when I got hired here, the policy didn't quite exist yet to have school paid for. It was like it was still new, right? Like the company I work for is not that old, and so like um, the structure of how that was built out is it was new, right? And so I was able to like advocate for that change, right? I won't say I'm the sole person for doing that, but I was a part of the reason, right, why it was important to do that. For example, like bringing up the costs, right, of like what an annual tuition cost is to graduate in 2 years, right? And so if that's sitting at like $10,000, then a $5,000 tuition reimbursement isn't going to cut it, you know. And so bringing up those topics and bringing up awareness, right, is what kind of helped me get to where I am in terms of getting that paid for, right? And so that was another piece where I was afraid to bring up because I was like, okay, who am I coming into this place like wanting to do that? But if it's important to you and if it's important to the company and or scholarship fund or something like that, then you got to do it. Which brings me to another point. The only scholarship I got in high school, I think, was applied. I applied for it, and uh, it was meant for only women uh, scholars, and I applied to it, and I don't remember why I applied to it or what, but I ended up getting the scholarship um, because I was able to advocate in my essay or whatever it is that I wrote. And this is high school; it's 10 years ago, and so I advocated in there for why I should get that scholarship, and they gave it to me, and it was partly because like I'm not sure if a lot of people applied to it, but regardless, I was able to advocate because it was like a career goal thing. And I was able to get it because I advocated for that piece. And I remember being in the interviews and having not realized that it was for women until they told me. And they said that like I would win this award because of like what I had said in there. And so that's, another lesson in terms of advocating.
So just to clarify, is your current full-time work also paying for your grad school, your online grad school program?
Yeah.
Do a lot of companies do that?
No, because so So most companies will offer a tuition reimbursement, which is, like I said, capped off at $5,250. What that means is like if I take classes and it costs me $5,000 for one semester, they're only going to give me that $5,000 to pay that one semester off, but after I complete the classes because it's a reimbursement. So I've already paid for it up front. And
Mhm.
then if I take that other semester and it costs me $10,000 the whole year, right? That other half of it comes out of my pocket because the reason that they cap it there is because uh, after anything that they offer you after that is taxed, right? So that's non-taxed wage that can be expensed in some way. For you, if like for me, I guess let's just use an example. I pay more than that, right? And so even though I'm getting school paid for, it comes out to about like 12 to $15,000 a year. I'm still actually paying taxes on that myself though, because the agreement is that like because we're going to cover the tuition costs, you got to pay the taxes on that. And so the taxes for me end up being about $2,000 a year, roughly something like that. And so that's just something to consider, right? Which is why most companies won't do it that way, because then either they're responsible for that tax or they make you responsible for that tax if they pay more than that $5,000. Now that $5,000 is also outdated because when that came into play, it was like 20 years ago, you know? And so tuition has obviously gone up, but tuition reimbursement hasn't followed.
Interesting. Okay, well, does anyone else have any questions? Please, do we need to elaborate on anything? I have some questions I can ask too, but I want to make sure everyone has a chance to ask. Oh yeah, last few words of wisdom, Hector.
I would say that I wish I was able to hear more from you all to just kind of hear what would have been more beneficial from you all, but I wouldn't say necessarily wisdom, but I do want to leave myself as a resource. And so I'll put my email out here in the chat in a minute, but I want to leave that up there so that you all can like reach out and maybe tell me what you want and what you need, because I did a whole lot of talking and I don't usually like to do it that way, but like given the circumstances, I think that's what's best. But yeah, I'm gonna put my email out there. And so like, if there's anything you want to talk about or talk about your personal situation, again, gonna be no expert, but offering myself as like another one of those resources, right? Where I mentioned that sometimes it's not necessarily always going to be your family because they may not understand what you get into, but it might be somebody like, you know, the staff that you have here, or it might be me, right? But I'm offering myself out there to just kind of support you in that. And so give you that platform and give you an opportunity to speak and tell me your story if you wanted to. So this is sort of the last thing I wanted to mention to you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for sharing. We still have 5 more minutes, so
Can I say one thing?
yes, please do.
Hector, you've been incredible. Just to let you know, like I didn't really even think about how much pressure my family puts on me. They're Palestinian, and you're either a doctor, a lawyer, and they'll put up with you being an engineer. So failure is not an option, and so that was a big thing. And then also your financial struggles, which is something that I'm coping with right now. I just wanted to thank you, and I'm definitely going to pick your brain.
Yeah, definitely. Please do. On that note, by the way, as I mentioned, I work with my employer, right? We work with partners like Walmart, Disney, blah, blah, blah. If like the finances is important to you or something like that, right? If you were to work at places like Walmart or Chipotle, Lowe's, or I don't know, like Disney, if you were there in that area, but those are 3 of the major companies. They would actually pay your full tuition to schools, some programs inside of DU even, Purdue. And so it's online versions of it. All of it is online, but that's one way that you can get access to having that paid for. And I think companies like Walmart actually even pay that tax part of it. So you wouldn't actually have to think about that. So that's just like some insight from like where I'm coming from. If like, you know, working a part-time job would help you, number one, make money, but also get that school paid for. You could look at the catalogs that Walmart or Lowe's or Chipotle offer. But yeah, there's a lot of people doing like a lot of different things and programs for free. Just
I
because.
think why I'm scared. So in my contract, I can't work my first year of law school. They said if you work at all, like even a little stand or anything, then you can get kicked out. So that's why I'm like so freaked out about even just my first year.
Definitely. Well, that's a very scary thing because I think that that's one of those things you got to work within the framework, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I got some time, so I'm working on it.
For sure.
I also wanted to thank you very much, Hector, for being willing to be very vulnerable and sharing kind of the more personal side of grad school.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But thank you all. I appreciate it. Thanks all for sitting in and listening to me talk for an hour. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Hector.